The mistress who claimed the slave's heart as her property. 1846. The night the truth came out, the whole plantation fell silent. A lantern burned in the big house window long after midnight. Inside that room, a young slave stood still as stone while the mistress of the house looked at him in a way no one had ever seen before. Her voice was calm, but her words would shake every wall on that land. She said his heart belonged to her, not by love alone, but by claim. And someone was listening outside that door. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's start story. It was the summer of 1846 in rural Georgia. The Carter plantation stood wide and proud under the hot sun, its white columns shining while the cotton fields stretched far beyond sight. Among the many slaves working those fields was a young man named Isaiah. He was strong, quiet, and carried himself with a calm dignity that others noticed. He did his work without complaint, but his eyes always seemed to hold thoughts he never spoke. Inside the big house lived Mistress Eleanor Carter. She was not old, yet not young enough to be carefree. Her husband, Master Thomas Carter, traveled often, leaving her alone for long weeks. The house was large, beautiful, and empty in ways no servant could fill. One afternoon, Eleanor saw Isaiah up close for the first time when he was called to repair a broken fence near the garden. Their eyes met only for a second. But something changed in that second. Something quiet. Something dangerous. From that day on, Eleanor began watching him more closely than she ever should have. And Isaiah could feel it. The days grew heavier after that first glance. Mistress Eleanor began finding small reasons to call Isaiah to the big house. Once, it was to move a heavy chest from one room to another. Another time, it was to fix a loose shutter outside her bedroom window. Each task was simple, yet she always stood nearby, watching him in silence. Isaiah kept his eyes low. He knew the rules of that land. A slave did not look too long. A slave did not speak unless spoken to. But even without looking, he could feel her gaze on him like warm sunlight that would not fade. One evening, as the sky turned orange, she stopped him in the hallway. "Isaiah," she said softly, "do you ever wish your life were different?" He hesitated. "Ma'am, wishing don't change nothing." She stepped closer than she should have. "Sometimes it does." From that day, whispers began among the other slaves. They noticed how often Isaiah was near the house. They noticed how the mistress's voice softened when she spoke his name. And far away on a dusty road, Master Thomas Carter was riding home earlier than anyone expected. The storm came without warning. That evening, dark clouds rolled across the Georgia sky. Wind bent the trees, and thunder shook the ground. Most of the slaves hurried into their cabins. The big house stood firm, its windows glowing with lamplight. Inside, Mistress Eleanor sat alone in the parlor. The storm outside matched the storm inside her heart. She had sent for Isaiah again. This time, not for a broken fence or a loose shutter. Isaiah stepped into the room, rein on his shoulders. "You called for me, ma'am?" Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "Close the door." He obeyed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The thunder filled the silence. "Isaiah," she said slowly, "do you know why I keep asking for you?" He kept his eyes down. "No, ma'am." She walked closer. "Because you are the only person on this land who looks at me like I exist." His head lifted just a little. "Ma'am, I shouldn't." "You shouldn't what?" she whispered. "Care? Feel. You think I don't see the way you hold yourself? The way you carry pain but never bow your spirit?" Isaiah's voice was low. "Ma'am, this talk is dangerous." She smiled sadly. "Everything here is dangerous." The storm roared louder. Then she said the words that would change everything. "You belong to this house. Your hands, your labor, your strength. But your heart is mine. I claim it." Isaiah stepped back as if struck. "Ma'am, you can't claim a man's heart." Her eyes flashed with something wild. "Can't I? The law says you are property, and I am mistress of this land." He shook his head slowly. "The law might say I'm property, but my heart belongs to God and to myself." For a second, something soft broke inside her. But pride rose faster than pain. "You dare speak that way to me?" "I speak truth," he said quietly. Before she could answer, the front door of the house slammed open. Heavy boots echoed across the hallway. Master Thomas Carter had returned. Neither of them had heard the horses over the storm. The parlor door swung wide. Thomas stood there, rain dripping from his coat, his face dark as thunder. His eyes moved from his wife to Isaiah, standing too close. Silence fell thick and heavy. "What is this?" Thomas asked, his voice cold. Eleanor straightened her back. Isaiah was helping with a matter inside the house. Thomas did not look convinced. He stepped closer. "At this hour? During a storm?" Isaiah lowered his head. "Master, I was called." Thomas walked around him slowly, like a man studying something he did not trust. "I've been hearing whispers," Thomas said, "about how often you are near this house." Eleanor's breath caught. "Whispers are foolish talk." Thomas turned to her sharply. "And is this foolish too?" His eyes were sharp, wounded, suspicious. Isaiah spoke before she could. "Master, I meant no harm." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You meant no harm?" "A slave does not decide what harm means." The room felt smaller. The storm outside grew fierce, lightning flashing bright through the windows. Then Thomas said something neither of them expected. "Leave us," he told Isaiah. Isaiah hesitated. Eleanor's eyes met his for a brief second. There was fear in them now. Real fear. But Isaiah obeyed. He stepped out into the hallway, the door closing behind him. From outside, he could hear raised voices. Thomas's anger. Eleanor's sharp replies. Words about loneliness. Words about neglect. Words about power. Then a crash, something breaking. The argument grew louder. And then, sudden silence. Moments later, the door opened. Thomas stood there, face pale but controlled. "Isaiah," he said slowly, "from this moment, you will not step foot inside this house again unless I call for you." "Yes, master," Isaiah replied. Thomas stared at him long and hard. "You seem to forget your place," he added quietly. "Don't make me remind you." Isaiah felt the weight of that warning deep in his chest. He walked back toward the slave cabins in the pouring rain. Behind him, inside the big house, Eleanor stood alone in the broken parlor. A vase lay shattered on the floor. Her marriage was cracked in ways that could not be fixed. She had tried to claim a heart she could never truly own. And now, every eye on that plantation would be watching. Because storms do not pass quietly. Sometimes, they leave scars that last a lifetime. The morning after the storm felt strange. The sky was clear again, bright and calm, as if nothing had happened. But everyone on the plantation could feel it. Something had shifted. Something heavy now hung in the air. Isaiah worked in the fields as usual, his hands steady, his back straight. But he could feel eyes on him. Other slaves whispered when he passed. Some looked worried for him. Others looked afraid to even speak. They had heard the shouting from the big house. They knew storms did not end without cause. Inside the house, Mistress Eleanor did not come down for breakfast. The servants said she had not slept. A broken vase still lay in pieces on the parlor floor. No one dared clean it without being told. Master Thomas moved through the house with quiet control. He gave no sign of rage, no loud commands. That was worse. His silence carried more danger than shouting ever could. By midday, he called for Isaiah. The message reached the fields quickly. Isaiah wiped the sweat from his face and walked toward the house. Every step felt heavy. He did not know what waited for him inside. When he entered the study, Thomas stood by the window, hands behind his back. "Close the door," he said. Isaiah did. For a long moment, Thomas said nothing. "I have run this land for many years," Thomas began. "I understand how power works. I understand weakness too." Isaiah stayed silent. Thomas turned around. "My wife is lonely. That is no secret. I have been away often. Business demands it." He stepped closer. "But loneliness does not excuse foolishness." Isaiah met his eyes just once, then lowered them again. "Master," he said carefully, "I never meant disrespect." Thomas studied him. "Did you encourage her?" "No, sir." "Did you feel something for her?" That question hung heavy in the room. Isaiah answered honestly. "I felt pity." Thomas's expression changed slightly. "Pity?" he repeated. "Yes, sir." She looked sad. Thomas looked away for a moment. He had not expected that answer. There was no boldness in Isaiah's voice, no challenge, only truth. Thomas walked back to his desk. "You are strong," he said quietly. "Strong men can cause trouble even when they do nothing." Isaiah understood what that meant. "From today," Thomas continued, "you will be moved to the far fields. You will work under the overseer directly. You will not come near this house." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Yes, master." Thomas hesitated. "I am not a cruel man," he added, "but I will protect what is mine." Those words cut deeper than any raised voice. What is mine? Isaiah left the study without another word. Outside, the sun felt harsh on his face. He did not look back at the house. But upstairs, behind lace curtains, Eleanor was watching. She had seen him enter the study. She had watched him walk out. And she knew what that look on her husband's face meant. That evening, she finally came downstairs. The servants stepped aside quietly. Thomas sat at the dining table. "You moved him," she said without greeting. "Yes." She stood across from him. "You think distance will solve this?" "It solves enough." She shook her head. "You do not understand." Thomas's voice hardened. "I understand perfectly. I will not have my household turned into gossip." Her eyes filled with something deeper than anger. "You speak of gossip. I speak of emptiness." He looked at her carefully. "You chose this life," he said. "We both did." She laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. "Did we?" Silence settled between them again. Later that night, Eleanor walked alone through the quiet halls. The house felt larger than ever, colder. She stopped by the parlor where the broken vase still lay. Slowly, she knelt and began picking up the pieces herself. Each shard reflected a small part of her face. Cracked, distorted. In the far fields, Isaiah worked harder than before. The overseer watched him closely. There were no more visits to the house, no more quiet conversations. But something inside him had changed. He had spoken truth in a room where truth was dangerous. And though he had lost comfort, he had kept his dignity. Days turned into weeks. The whispers faded. The plantation returned to its routine. Yet beneath the calm surface, 3 hearts carried scars. Thomas guarded his pride. Eleanor guarded her longing. And Isaiah guarded his freedom, the only kind he truly owned. But life has a way of bringing one final test. And soon, all 3 would face it. Summer slowly gave way to early autumn. The cotton fields turned pale and heavy, ready for harvest. Work grew longer, harder. Isaiah labored from sunrise to sunset in the far fields, under the sharp eyes of the overseer. He spoke little. He kept his strength inside himself, like a flame protected from wind. Inside the big house, life looked calm again. Guests visited. Meals were served. Laughter sometimes echoed through the halls. But it was thin laughter, light and empty. Mistress Eleanor changed in quiet ways. She no longer stood by the windows waiting. She no longer asked about repairs near the garden. She kept her distance, at least in sight. But distance does not erase memory. One afternoon, news arrived that changed everything. Master Thomas received a letter. His face tightened as he read it. A relative in another state had fallen ill. Business and family matters demanded that he travel north for several months. He folded the letter carefully. Eleanor watched him from across the room. "You are leaving again," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. "It cannot be avoided." She nodded, though her heart felt heavy. That night, as Thomas prepared for his journey, he spoke to her in a calmer tone than he had in weeks. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what happened." She said nothing. "I was angry," he admitted, "but perhaps not only at you. Perhaps at myself." Her eyes lifted slightly. "I left you alone too often," he continued. "This house became a place of silence." She swallowed hard. Silence can be louder than shouting. He studied her face for a long moment. "When I return," he said, "things will be different." It was not a promise of love, but it was something honest. The next morning, Thomas rode away. The plantation felt quieter without him. For several days, Eleanor stayed inside. She walked through the halls, touching the walls as if they held secrets. Then one evening, she did something no one expected. She asked to visit the far fields. The overseer was surprised, but he did not refuse. Isaiah saw her before she reached him. His heart tightened, but his face remained calm. She stopped a few feet away. "I won't stay long," she said quietly. He nodded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved softly through the dry cotton plants. "I was wrong," she said at last. Isaiah looked at her carefully. "I tried to claim something that was never mine," she continued. "Not your heart. Not your spirit," he answered gently. "No one owns a heart, man." Her eyes were not proud now. They were clear. "I thought power could fill emptiness," she said. "But it only made it larger." Isaiah felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not tension, but understanding. "You were lonely," he said. "Yes." "And I was someone who listened." She gave a small, sad smile. "That is all you ever were," she said. "Someone who listened." I turned it into something else. Silence settled between them again, but this time it was peaceful. "I will not call you to the house again," she said firmly. "You deserve distance from my mistakes." Isaiah nodded. "I hold no anger," he replied. She seemed surprised by that. "Why not?" "Because anger would tie my heart to this place," he said softly. "And I need it free." Those words stayed with her long after she turned away. As the weeks passed, Eleanor began changing the way she managed the household. She treated the servants with more kindness. She listened more than she spoke. The big house slowly felt less cold. When Thomas returned months later, he noticed the difference. The house felt calmer. His wife felt steadier. They spoke more openly than before. Not perfectly, not magically healed, but honestly. And Isaiah? He continued working in the fields. But something inside him had grown stronger. He had faced power and kept his truth. He had stood in a room where he could have been broken, and he walked out whole. Years later, when change finally began sweeping across the South, when freedom came slowly and painfully, Isaiah remembered that night in the parlor. The night someone tried to claim his heart. And he remembered the words he had spoken. "My heart belongs to God and to myself." In the end, that was the only ownership that truly mattered. Years passed, and the world outside the plantation began to change in ways no one could stop. The old system that once seemed unshakable slowly cracked. Freedom did not come in one bright morning. It came through struggle, through loss, through long seasons of waiting. When the day finally arrived that Isaiah no longer worked those fields as property, he did not shout. He did not run. He simply stood still for a moment and breathed. The land looked the same. The sky looked the same, but he was no longer owned. He left the plantation quietly, carrying nothing but a small bundle and a heart that had always been his. As for Eleanor and Thomas, they remained in the big house, older and quieter. They learned that power cannot replace love, and love cannot be forced. Sometimes the greatest freedom is not walking away from chains, but refusing to let anyone claim your spirit in the first place.